if you want to just state who you are and everything, just so that people are watching and still know, and what years you served and so on.
Okay, I'm Leland H. Sorensen. I live in Idaho. Um, I was in the Air Force July. Well, I actually went in April, but it was the delayed enlistment program, which put me in the reserves, so I didn't get drafted. But I actually went active in July of 1967. And I was discharged from active duty. I still had a couple more years of reserve duty to get my six in, but I was relieved from active duty the end of February 1971. So I enlisted for 4 years active, and because I only had 4.5 months left on that 4-year term, they didn't want to reassign me for another 4.5 months somewhere else. So I was given an early out. I was in Pararescue. I went to, like I said, I went active in July of 1967, a year after graduating from high school. And a year after enlisting, I graduated as a pararescueman. And then I went to helicopter school to become an aircrew member on a helicopter, an HH-3E. And then on November 28th, 1967.
Now the HH-3E, that's the what they call low bird, right? Usually on the missions. That was Jolly Green Giant, or no?
It went by the call sign Jolly Green. The HH-3E, the only place, I think the only place they had the HH-53 was at Udorn, which was, they called them the Super Jolly Green, or buff was another word. Big, ugly, fat fellow. They weren't that nice though with their language, but yeah, the buff was in Udorn, and they called them Nitnoys. I guess that's supposed to be Thai for little or tiny or whatever, I don't know. But they called them the Nitnoys and the buffs. And the HH-3Es were stationed at NKP and also in Da Nang, in South Vietnam. And High Bird and Low Bird were just the two aircraft that were on alert duty that, you know, went out on a mission to pick up a downed pilot, depending on who was closest. So I'm not aware that we ever mixed the H-53 with the H-3 in a high bird, low bird situation. They were always, you know, came from the same place, the high bird and low bird, so they would have been together, unless for some reason they had two different locations out there on a rescue, you know. But obviously only one would be the low bird. The low bird's the one that went in to make the pickup, unless something went bad or south, or they crashed or whatever. Then the high bird came in and tried to save the day. So yeah, that's the difference between the HH-3E and the HH-53. I guess just a glance at them, just a common person may not recognize the difference and mistake one for the other. But the HH-53 had its two big engines mounted outside of the helicopter, up on just below the rotors. And they had more rotor blades on both. They had a different number both on the tail and on the main rotor than the H3 did. The H3s were internal to that cowling just under the main rotor, and they were a lot smaller. If they were side by side, you would obviously see the difference between the H-53 and the H3. But yeah, as far as high bird, low bird, they would have been paired. An H3 would have been backing up an H3, and an H53 would have been backing up an H53. So, yeah.
So is that normal? I'm going to use the Forrest Fenn rescue only because that right now that's the only one I'm familiar with, besides yours. But they had, was it normal to have? I know I showed a picture, and I'll pop it up again here later, but it shows Forrest actually being the low bird is down here, so the H3 is down there getting him out, and the picture was taken, I guess, from a photographer that was on the 53 that was up above, and then they also had, I believe, four A1s. They call them Sandys, right? Sandy 1 through 4.
Yeah.
Was that a typical mission where rescue would have all the 4 planes and the 2 helicopters?
Yes. Sometimes more than 4 planes. Sometimes they called in some fast movers. That's a jet, or some other slow movers, to assist. And sometimes they even had a forward air controller to kind of direct all this traffic and everything out there. And C-130 could have been in the area. That went by the call sign Crown. To kind of coordinate all that. It's probably unusual to have an H3 down making the pickup, like with Finn, apparently, and have an H53 in the area also. They carried a photographer, so I don't know if that photographer it was really an H53 or if it was just one of the crew on the Hybrid with a camera. I guess it could be either way. They may have called in some H53s to come in case they needed them, because the H53 was manned with 3 miniguns. The minigun had 2 triggers. You pulled one and it put out 2,000 rounds a minute, and you pulled the second one with it and it put out 4,000 rounds a minute. And to start up the minigun, you shifted gears like that. You pulled the 2,000 round, then you pulled the 4,000 round, and then to stop, you let go of the 4,000 round and then let go of the 2,000 round. That's so it didn't, that sudden jerk on the ammo belt didn't break it. Apparently, I've heard that they tried 6,000 rounds even in the beginning, but they found that just jerked the belt apart. They couldn't start up that fast. And so they went to 2,000 and 4,000. It was motor driven, so they could make it run at any speed they wanted, I guess. But the H-53 was better armed. Plus they had more crew members. They had, in addition to the 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a PJ, they had a second PJ and a photographer on board the H-53, and they were a lot bigger, so they could carry more crew. But so I don't understand that H-53 being the Hybrid on Finn's mission and taking that picture. Maybe, like I say, it may have been an H-53 that they called into the area, but it could also be the Hybrid was an H-3, which they went out in pairs. Like I say, I'm not aware they ever paired an H-3 with an H-53, but because the H-53s were 100 miles further west from NKP even. And their mission mostly was going north up by the PDJ in Laos. So yeah, somebody may have gotten it wrong that it was an H-53 Hybrid taking the picture, but I guess that's not totally out of the question. Maybe the H-53 eventually got there before the mission was completed. But if there's an H-3 on the pickup, there's probably an H-3 somewhere in the area as Hybrid. And the H-3s only had 2 M60 machine guns, which I don't know, put out about, I'm guessing here, 650 rounds a minute, as opposed to 2,000 or 4,000 rounds a minute. Once they put the hoist out to pick somebody up, they had to pull the door M60 into the helicopter. It was on a bar that swung around and went into the door to be used. And when they actually had to use the hoist, they had to bring that back in the helicopter. And so that left one M60 on the other side of the helicopter out the window. And if they ever sent the PJ down, the only other crew member in the back sent him down on the hoist, then there's nobody on the M60s. And although I think I did hear once or that the co-pilot actually got out of the co-pilot seat and went back and was manning the window gun because the flight engineer was running the hoist and the PJ was on the hoist. So I guess it wasn't totally impossible to have somebody running the weapon, but of course that's one side of the helicopter, and that leaves three other sides that you don't really see in the circle there. But that's the difference between the H3 and the H53. In the H3, you had to kind of duck as you walked down the length of the inside of the back there. And especially when you got underneath the main rotor, there was a lot of armor plating and inside the helicopter that you had to really duck or you smacked your head on it. At least I was 6 feet tall. I would smack my head on it. And you'd have to be short to not have to duck. And the H53, you could raise your arms in the air and walk all the way from the front to the back and not touch anything on the ceiling. That's the difference in the size of those two helicopters.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, let me ask you a quick question about that, and then also get something else out of the way regarding helicopters. So, yeah, I mean, regarding the whether or not that was an H-53 up higher, I watched the, I think his name was Richard Hill, his video. He was Sandy 2 in Forrest Fenn's rescue, and he was the one, but he didn't mention, all he said was we had 4 Sandys, and then they had 2 Jollies. He didn't say what the 2 were. We could see a picture of one of them. So one of them was obviously higher. And then I think there might have been the 130 up there. They called the guy Nail. I don't know who that was. Nail.
Nail was, I think that was just like a Cessna, little,
Oh, okay.
1-seater, 2-seater. That was a forward air controller. They would go in and maybe reach, stick a smoke bomb out the window and drop it, and then use that smoke as a reference for airstrikes to go in, as a forward air controller would do. There were, I mean, even F4s were, fast movers. Of course, a fast mover is not a very good. It's a little tough to drop a smoke exactly where you want it, unless you're in a little Cessna type aircraft. But the F4s would go in and evaluate bomb damage also, kind of as a forward air controller, and direct. If there was an explosion on the ground, putting out a lot of smoke, they would use that as a reference, to tell somebody to go in and drop their, drop their bombs or napalm or whatever, north of the smoke or south of the smoke or whatever. Nail was just a small, Cessna, I guess.
So he's helping just track down where the pilot is, essentially.
Pardon?
He's helping track down where the pilot was, I would imagine, right? The forward air controller.
And direct traffic. I mean, they were air controllers, and so they would tell who to go in to make their next run, so everybody isn't knocking heads right over the scene there, and making sure they don't drop things on something they shouldn't be dropping things. So yeah, it was controlling the air.
This other question, now this is part of the problem. When I came out with the last video and I was mentioning the stenciled name on the helicopter, and I know that you've seen the picture of Forrest Fenn where now the reason we initially thought, why was there so many officers? Well, they weren't all on the helicopter. Those were just the Sandy pilots, so on. So we got that worked out, but the candy hen thing came up. And I know a lot of the people in the fan community are going to want to know, because the way I thought I was being clear, at NKP, is mainly where you were. You were familiar with the helicopters there. Now, it is possible that that helicopter flew in from another base, but at your base, were you aware of any helicopter, any Jolly Green Giants at all that had a name similar to Candian stamped on the door?
No. And after you mentioned that, yeah, where that Candy Inn was, I actually, zoomed in on it, and you're right. There is in black on a green helicopter, Candy Inn. If that was a practice, I don't remember ever seeing it, and I don't know. It, I don't know how it could be from Da Nang. That helicopter could have been from Da Nang, but in South Vietnam, it didn't matter. In South Vietnam, the month I was there, I found out that I was unusual because my uniform did not have any insignia or name or Air Force or any indication. It was just like it came right out of the package, my uniform, and apparently that's a Thailand thing and not a South Vietnam thing. And one of the PJs when I was in at Da Nang there that week at Da Nang, and we were going through the chow line, and of course everybody in South Vietnam had their rank on their uniform, and the Army or Air Force or whatever, Navy, or and their name and their insignia, and the guy, one of the PJs told me, if somebody tries to write you up for not having your uniform properly labeled, just ignore them.
Now that was because of the treaty that we had with them. I believe you told me, right?
Yes, yeah.
So because you were mentioning that you couldn't even have Air Force on the side of the helicopter, they had to flip it around when they went out for a rescue.
Yeah, yeah. You probably, I don't know, maybe every aircraft you see has a circle with a star, a 5-point star in the middle, and then a couple of bars out on each side, or a bar on each side with one stripe down the middle of those bars, indicating it's. I don't know if it indicates Air Force, if it indicates United States. I don't know, but yeah, we had one of those on the back of our helicopter. It was not red, white, and blue like they are on an uncamouflaged helicopter, but it was on a metal placard. I don't know, maybe 14, 15 inches wide by 8 inches high or 6 inches high, and it was just dropped into a metal slotted thing on the back of the helicopter. And when we would land in Laos, the first thing we would do is go to the back of the helicopter and turn those plates around so that there was only the picture on one side. So if we turned them around, then that was the last and only thing on there that indicated that was from the United States of America. And then before we would take off, we would go back and turn that placard around so that camouflage star was near the back of the helicopter. And the treaty was that North Vietnam would stay out of Laos and Cambodia, and the United States would stay out of Laos and Cambodia. Of course, neither country honored that treaty, I guess. What they did do was deny that they were there. And so anybody that was stationed in Thailand as a pararescueman had a security clearance, and I had a secret security clearance. Some of the pilots had secret, some of the pilots had top secret security clearance. But I think it was because we were in a place where we weren't supposed to be, and they didn't want us being a blabbermouth and telling the whole world that we were actually fighting a war in Laos. And that made it a little awkward. Like you asked me how long was I in Vietnam. Well, I was in Vietnam 1 week or 30 days rather. 3 weeks at one place and 1 week at another, and that was my time in Vietnam. Other than the 2 times we entered North Vietnam airspace, we entered on 2 separate missions. We entered North Vietnam airspace, making a pickup. But other than that, I wasn't really in Vietnam. I was in Laos, and even today it sounds awkward to say I was in the Laotian War, and they kind of look at you and scratch their head. The Laotian War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching 2 other videos that said the same exact thing, that was kind of a secret war in Laos. I mean, I know you don't want to come out and say it, but yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple other videos on YouTube that pretty much indicate that. So there's quite a few people that feel like you do, where when people ask me in Vietnam, well, I was in Vietnam for X amount of months, but I really was in Laos for a year. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about the helicopter, to get it out of the way, and these are questions that I had coming from the Forrest Fenn community. This the guillotine. Now, before you say anything, I know I had done some research and I found a Lockheed Martin design document from 1972, and it appears that they were contemplating changing the design and adding a guillotine because they had a lot of incidents, and I know one of them you're going to describe, where what happened with the PJ and the pilot on the bottom when the helicopter couldn't pull away, because exactly that scenario happened. The guillotine, the jungle penetrator with the guys on it got stuck in the trees. They're under fire, Leland's helicopter, and they had to get out of there. And I'll let him tell the story, but unfortunately, there was no guillotine to cut that cable. And I know Forrest Fenn mentions that in the My War for Me, in The Thrill of the Chase. However, he doesn't mention it in the article that he put My War for Me that he published in 2006. So he may have just been confused, and in 72 he knew that they existed, but that may not have been on those helicopters back in 68 and 69. And I'll let Leland elaborate on that, because Forrest Fenn making the comment that also he made a mistake where he said that it was Maples, the flight engineer, that pulled him in to the helicopter. And then in the book, he changed it because it was actually Robert J. Sully, who is the PJ that was on that particular flight, who incidentally went to training school with Leland. That's how I was able to find some of this out. And I showed some pictures of that where they were basically together. But so do you want to elaborate on this guillotine thing and describe that one mission where you were telling me where the PJ with the PJ and the pilot were actually killed on the line?
Sure. Yeah, as a pararescueman, we were trained to use the hoist. We had to actually, do it for training. And what that involved was the door on the helicopter is on the right side. And, well, unless there's a door on both sides of the helicopter, the helicopter is on the right side, which makes an interesting configuration of the pilot and co-pilot. The pilot in a helicopter sits in the right seat. The pilot in a regular aircraft sits in the left seat. So I guess that's so that the pilot can actually look out the right side and see what's going on, on the right side where the door is. So, but we were trained in the use of the hoist. We had to actually, stand there in the doorway and just slightly to the back of the door, there's the lever. It's a round disc type with a little bar sticking out the side, and you swung that either way to go up or down with the hoist. and we had to actually guide the pilot over a spot and then lower the hoist down to the ground. It's that was the case in the jungle. It was also the case in water. If you're over water, which made things a little more difficult because as you're hovering in a helicopter, the waves are blowing away from the helicopter, so it makes it look like the helicopter's drifting one way it shouldn't. And if you're ever in that situation, piloting a helicopter, watch the bubbles. The bubbles don't drift under a helicopter. The bubbles are stationary. So that's what you need to keep your eye on, so that you're not, drifting away from the target. But yeah, there was, and so I'm just saying that there were no guillotines on the helicopter when I was in there. And the one time that a guillotine may have been useful, I guess, useful to some of the people at least, was it was Christmas Day, 1968. The guy that slept in the bunk bed beneath mine, I was in the top bunk in the PJ Hooch, and Charlie King was in the bunk bed beneath me in the PJ Hooch. And he was out on a mission picking up a pilot. They found the pilot, they found the parachute. Sometimes that takes a little doing to do in the jungle, but it was eventually located, and they lowered him to the ground. He took the jungle penetrator, which was it was made out of aluminum, so it wasn't real heavy, but it was a fairly good sized chunk of metal with three arms that folded up to make it more like a bomb shape, so it would go down through the trees. And when you needed to get on it, you could fold one arm down or two arms down or three arms down, so you could actually get two people onto the jungle penetrator, is the term they called it. But anyway, he was dragging the jungle penetrator across the floor of the jungle, underneath trees and branches and stuff like that, over to where the pilot was that they were picking up. And he put the pilot was dead, but he put the pilot on the jungle penetrator seat, and then had the flight engineer raise the hoist, which in essence, drug the deceased body of the pilot along the floor of the jungle over to get underneath the helicopter so they could get up into the helicopter. And as he got over underneath the helicopter and was, I guess, being started to be raised up, the enemy sprung their little trap they'd set up and opened fire on the helicopter and on the PJ that was on the end of the hoist cable. And according to the combat log, search and rescue log, he said, "I'm hit, pull up." According to the flight engineer, he said, "I'm hit, pull up. I'm hit, pull up. I'm hit, pull up." And so the flight engineer is trying to raise the hoist, and the pilots, the helicopter's taking ground fire, and the PJ's been hit, and so the helicopter pulls up, and if you're unfamiliar with helicopters, hovering in ground effect, that's the term they use, in ground effect or out of ground effect. It's easier to hover in ground effect because you tend to pin that air pressure underneath your helicopter blades. Whereas if you're hovering higher, that air, that pressure that you build up underneath the wings tends to dissipate you know, so it isn't as effective, I guess, is the term that you use. So as they're hovering there in the trees, they're, I guess, considered in ground effect, and so it takes less power. But if the helicopter is going to raise up, it's going to have to start going forward so it can pull in new air, uh, over the slight vacuum that is created above the rotor, and give it something to actually grab onto and shove down to lift the helicopter. So it wouldn't be long until that helicopter was out of ground effect, and it would have to start moving forward. When that happened, the PJ and the deceased pilot and the end of the cable got hung up in the trees, and as the helicopter's trying to fly away, it's mounted. The hoist is mounted outside the helicopter above the right side door there, and it, as I recall, it was kind of like a tripod mount, I guess. There may have been 4 little bars that went out and attached it, but it was mounted out there, and as this helicopter is flying away without its penetrator seat, it pulls that hoist, it rips it from the side of the helicopter. And I don't know at what point the cable actually broke, but as this hoist breaks, it swings down, hanging by probably one of the little braces that it was holding it on the side of the helicopter. It swings down into the doorway and clips the flight engineer on the leg, and kind of doesn't break his leg, but it hits him pretty hard, and he's probably bleeding from his leg at that point. But anyway, the helicopter does get away. The hoist, I guess, I'm not aware, actually. I guess as I think about it, I don't know if the hoist was eventually ripped all the way off the side of the helicopter, or if it snapped the cable and the hoist was hanging there in the doorway of the helicopter. But I could see it going either way, I guess, at this point, as I think about it. But anyway, the rest of the day, the Sandys and all the other aircraft that were on scene were trying to get somebody to come up on radio, because they didn't know what had happened to Charlie King or to the deceased pilot. And there were, I think they probably got we carried walkie-talkies that had the emergency frequency, and if you went on there to that frequency and pushed a button, it starts sending out the beeper, the emergency beeper that they could locate. And for a few days, there was beeper activity in that area. And when that happens, the aircraft in the air fly over that site and say, beeper, beeper, come up voice, telling whoever's using this radio as a beeper, emergency beeper, they want you to come up voice. But nobody would ever come up voice. And as the aircraft honed in on the signal, the beeper would actually stop. I'm sure they were just trying to get another helicopter to come in there so they would shoot it out of the sky too. But that was the last anybody saw of Charlie King, or at least any Americans. I think today his Geneva Convention card, which has his name, rank, and serial number on there, and that's according to the Geneva Convention. That's the only information we are required to give, and we all carry that Geneva Convention card in our. We didn't take a lot out on a mission because we didn't want our wallet or our pictures of our family getting discovered, but we did carry those few items: our military ID card, our Geneva Convention card, and I think that was about it.
I can see where that a guillotine would have came in handy there. I mean, from what I could see in the design document, it looks like when they did add them on the there's a device I guess you hold in your hand, and it would have a guarded switch and had a red button underneath the guard, and you would press that. That would I think one of the ones they have would actually have the thing that would come out and cut a cable. Another one had an explosive charge that would go off. These were designs they were, but the other thing is the pilot would also have access to that same button. So if something happened to the flight engineer and the PJ and the pilot need to cut it loose, they would do that. So I believe, I don't know when they went into effect, but it was accidents such as the one you just talked about that would have led to advancements in that technology.
Right. I think so.
Right.
Yeah. The Charlie King's Geneva Convention card is in a museum, I think, in Vietnam today. They've never found his body or the body of the pilot, I guess, either. But yeah, that was the day a guillotine probably would have been handy. Like I say, not so handy to the PJ, but handy to the rest of the helicopter.
And the other thing we talked about, just to get the Forrest Fenn stuff out of the way, I know he may have made that mistake where he credited Maples, the flight engineer, instead of Sully, because as you were describing, both of those guys would be wearing helmets with visors. Well, certainly the PJ would have a visor on. You got the boom mic. So the fact of the matter is, until Forrest got back to NKP, he wouldn't really know who anybody was that was on there, correct?
Right. And yeah, and there's no name tags on your uniform. So, one guy looks pretty much like the next guy, especially with the ballistic helmet and the visor down and the boom mic, across the bottom of just below the visor. But yeah, and it was the flight engineer's duty to run the hoist. The PJ, if he wasn't on the hoist, he would be over holding on to the M60 machine gun, across the other side of the helicopter there, which wasn't that far. And as the pilot, or as the hoist would be coming up, like on Fenn, as that survivor would be nearing the doorway of the helicopter, probably the PJ is going to turn around and assist the loadmaster in bringing that, because, the hoist is mounted outside the helicopter. You can't just step off the hoist onto solid ground. You're going to have to be pulled into the doorway. And then the flight engineer is going to have to lower the hoist to sit the penetrators and the person on it onto the floor of the helicopter. But I guess I could see both of them being there, and maybe both of them even pulling him in. But it's probably more likely the loadmaster, or I'm not the loadmaster. I'm on the C-130 now. The flight engineer pulling him in, because he has also control of that hoist. That's the lever just behind, foot or two behind the back edge of the doorway. And so he knows when to, start lowering it and everything as he brings the person in. But it could, I would think the flight engineer at least had a part in it, if not the part in it. And the PJ would have been a secondary assistee, I guess, to facilitate that, transfer from outside the aircraft to being inside the aircraft. And at that point, as I understand, Fenn was told to go get on those flak vests. And what that is especially the older, no longer used flak vests, they used to have metal strips in them. and it was just a vest, like police wear, I guess, so you don't get shot in the more vital organ area. But there were also flak skirts that they could put around their upper legs and hips to protect from, well, flak basically. But and I don't know, we never tested them out if they were bulletproof, but knowing the military, they probably were not even bulletproof. But maybe they were. But
Yeah. So
anyway, we would take these old vests and just throw them on the floor, because in a helicopter, most of your rounds are probably going to be coming through the floor. And so we would throw some of those on the floor in the beginning when I was there. But later on, apparently a pilot found a pile of titanium plating that was probably about a 1/4 inch thick. And we started using that on the floor of the helicopter, just tying it down with tie down straps and things to secure it there. But yeah, at that point, apparently with Finn, we were still using flak vests. And so that's what they meant when they told him to go get on those flak vests in the back there.
okay, so to wrap up the Forrest Fenn stuff, because I want to get onto your story, which I think is amazing. Uh, so to wrap up the Forrest Fenn, now Sully, who again is the PJ, so the same role as you, and like I said before, you had went to training with Sully. Were you two ever on any missions together?
I Well, probably see at NKP, there's only one PJ on the aircraft, but there were two aircraft, two helicopters. And so I guess there could have been a time when I was on one, either high or low bird, and he was on the other aircraft. Um, when I flew as a two PJ configuration, it was in Udorn with the H-53s. And Sully did not go TDY with me. I had another guy that went TDY with me twice. The second time he didn't come back. They just, I don't mean he died, but he didn't come back to the NKP. They made that TDY, temporary duty, permanent. And so he then stayed. I think that was the second TDY, but I'm not sure when he got permanently transferred there. But at that time, you would have been on the same on the same helicopter, because there were two PJs. But Sully did not go TDY with me to Udorn. So I can't really say that we were ever on. I'm guessing it's totally possible, but he would have been on the other aircraft, the other helicopter, high bird, low bird, whichever the situation was.
Yeah, I found I don't know what the website is, usrotorheads.org, something like that. And they showed a Forrest Fenn one. And then right after that, a couple months later, the following year, you and him are listed together. But you're just saying you were on different helicopters, if that would have been the case then. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out to the viewers is that there were no assigned Jolly Green Giants, like no teams in a sense. Like, for example, the person that rescued Forrest Fenn, one of the helicopter pilots was Egan. And you can see a picture of him and Forrest Fenn. He's wearing that funny looking hat. I'm going to pop a picture up here of a different mission where uh, he was out with other people, and I got Leland, a picture of Leland with him. I'm sorry, a picture of Leland with Egan on a completely different mission, and Leland is standing next to Egan. So they weren't assigned like specific helicopters. And that's where the candy ant comes into play again. It wasn't like, okay, guys, like a pilot would be assigned to, like Forrest Fenn, he had an F-100, and that was that. But these guys didn't have it assigned; they would just go out and pick whatever was available, correct?
Whichever was on alert, yeah.
And whoever
They
was available there, whatever PJ, whatever pilot, whatever flight engineer, whatever. It wasn't like you guys had a team where you always work with the same people, right?
Yeah. You took rotation, being on alert, and it wasn't always the same people assigned, because there were different number of PJ and different number of flight engineers and different number of pilots, so it wasn't like you could pair up and remain that way all the time. And as far as the helicopter, it's whichever one they stuck out on alert. And by that, I mean, they took them from a more distant place on the tarmac and brought them up next to the operations building. And there were two helicopters that were there parked near the operations building. And when you had to, scramble the jollies, in other words, you then went, if you were in the operations building, then you went out and got on the helicopter. But if you were in your hooch, you got out and you went through the back door of the operations building and then out the front door of the operations building. And the helicopters were just right there, very near that building. And you got on and away you went. And, we didn't know who was assigned pilots or who was the flight engineer assigned, but you just knew that either you were or you weren't assigned to be on alert status.
Okay, so the other thing, now I want to get on to Leland's story. Basically, in this story occurs March 17th, 1969. So just under 3 months after Forrest Fenn was shot down. I mean, there were thousands probably of pilots that were rescued out of Laos. And I didn't even ask, maybe Leland can elaborate on how many, that he was personally involved in, but he was involved in enough to have received a Silver Star. He's got 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 6 Air Medals for all his actions during the war, during that 1 year that he was out there. So amazing, man. And the story that he'll tell you now is just, it's already out there recorded. It's also, I believe, in the archives, you were saying. Um, Leland, where is it?
Uh, Library of Congress.
Library of Congress. Okay, so yeah, I'll let him tell his story. It's just amazing. And guys, when you're listening to the story, especially people that are aware of Forrest Fenn, think about the end of what he talks about, the French graves and the people being alone. And these men were killed in action, and I don't have to elaborate on it for those of you who haven't read it. I'll leave a link to My War for Me. And Leland's story is really similar to that. So I'll let him tell it now. It's amazing. So I'll shut up and mute my mic and let you go.
I went TDY to Udorn the middle of January, and like I say, about 3 days later, I was on a rescue mission with the H-53. TDYs were 45 days or less, I guess. So that means by the end of February, I would have been off that TDY and back at NKP. A couple of weeks later would have been, March 17th, 1969. And I was actually on Highbird. We were going out to pick up this pilot. I believe we were on the ground at Lima Site 98. Lima sites were places in Laos. That's the phonetic or whatever word for L. We were at Lima Site 98. I believe the name of that place is Long Tien. that was a kind of a headquarters for General Vang Pao, and we would land there, and then the pilots would go up to the, I don't know, the office or whatever they called it there on the at the far end of the runway, and visit with, I don't know who all, but the enlisted people would remain with the helicopter as we parked it there on the side of this Lima side runway, and we had a radio that was set up, and if something happened, that's how I guess whoever was dispatching the jollies would get a hold of us. They would come over this radio and let us know that we're needed somewhere. I don't remember how we got in the air that day, or because I never did answer the radio, and I don't think I ever did see it answered. So maybe either the pilots got the word up, another way, or we were in the air at the time that somebody got shot down. But it was on the PDJ. The F-105 pilot, one-seater, was hit, and so he started to egress. That was a term we used a lot, ingress and egress. You don't hear that much used in a conversation, but yeah, he was trying to egress the area. In other words, get out of there. And unlike South Vietnam, where if they get hit and they're still able to fly, they head for the ocean, the Gulf, so that, because there aren't very many ambushes out in the middle of the ocean. But anyway, when you're in the middle of Laos and your cockpit is filling up with smoke, you don't have much choice. So anyway, he didn't get very far from the PDJ, and he had to eject because his cockpit was filling up with smoke. As he was coming down in his helicopter, or no, coming down in his parachute, his wingman and whoever else was in the area watched him descend in his parachute. He was waving at them. He was tearing up classified documents as he was descending. And then they watched him go into the trees. And there they kind of lost where he was exactly. And I think this was like about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, local time. And it took them a while, but we were orbiting. That's another term they don't use very often. We were orbiting in the area, waiting for them to find the parachute. Well, they finally located the parachute, and like I say, I was on high bird. The low bird went in to make the pickup. As they're going in, they get over the parachute that they've discovered, and they're lowering the PJ down. He had his M16 out and apparently the safety off, but as he's going down, the cable's kind of rotating a little bit, as cables do. They tend to unwind as you pull on them. But he's going down, and as he's getting nearer the ground, he bumps into a tree. Or a limb or something. Anyway, he accidentally fires off his M16. And of course, the people up in the helicopter have no idea what's going on. They pull him back up, be the flight engineer. The flight engineer pulls him back up. He gets into the helicopter, and the helicopter takes off. It's a while, I guess, before the PJ finally lets everybody know that it was him. It was it was accidental that he fired that off. So anyway, they go back in. This is after, it's been a long time getting the parachute located. And now the PJ's gone in and marked the terrain with a burst of M16 fire. And anyway, they're back into the hover. They start lowering the PJ down again. This time he gets about halfway down, and all of a sudden it stops and he's going back up. He has no idea what that's about, but anyway, he gets in, and the flight engineer tells him, "We found a fray in the cable." Okay, so they pull off. Now they're sending hybrid in. They've had a helicopter hovering over the site twice now, and now they're going to send us in. I'm now the PJ going to go down the hoist, even though I was on hybrid. But so we go in, we find the parachute, and we hover, and they lower me. Well, where the parachute is, there's a bare spot on the side of the hill, and by bare I don't mean bare of foliage. There's grass, probably a couple feet, 3 feet tall, on the side of this slope, but there are no trees. There are trees, as I looked up this bare spot, there were trees off to the left and trees off to the right and trees farther up at the top of this bare strip. And as I looked down below the bare strip, there were trees down there too. And it was a pretty steep hillside. It was probably a good 45-degree slope. And I am not exaggerating, because when I went back, I still found it to be a pretty steep slope. But they lower me down. I don't know, it's probably, I'm just guessing now, trying to visualize it in my memory. But it was a good 75, maybe 100 yards down below where the parachute was. And so they lowered me to the ground. I started climbing up this steep hillside, and it was steep enough that I had to kind of hold on to grass, grab a handful of grass so that I didn't slide back down. It just made it easier to climb. I couldn't just hike up the hillside. But as I got going up there, I could see the parachute off to the left into the trees slightly. And as I get up there, I start to see drops of blood in the grass. I'm still, 20 yards away, well, at least 10 yards away, but I'm not right up on it yet, but I start to see drops of blood in the dry grass there. And as I get closer, those drops of blood become more frequent. And then as I get up to the parachute, I look in there, and what has happened, this guy has probably, well, I'm still not totally sure how it all worked out, but he would have gone into the trees up higher, and yet out of the trees enough that when he hit the ground, he was able to roll down the hill. He probably fell 100, 150 feet once he went into the trees. His parachute collapsed, and he fell to his death. His death was not very far away, if not killed in the fall. But then as he rolls down this hill, he has dropped his seat kit. A seat kit is what comes out with you when you eject. And it probably has stuff like life rafts and survival gear and stuff like that. But so it's a fairly thick seat kit. But before you land with this seat kit, you would have been required to drop it on a lanyard. And that lanyard would have dropped down, 20, 25 feet, so that the seat kit hits the ground before you do as an ejected pilot. And this seat kit and the lanyard, as he rolled down the hill, not only did that wrap up around his body, but the parachute lines and all of the canopy would have been, rolling back up around him like a burrito. No disrespect for the dead, but he would have been wrapped up in all of this stuff. Well, his seat kit, where he lands, is high on his back, and the parachute, of course, with all of its lines, are wrapped around and around and around, and nearly all of the canopy, there's a little bit of cloth that's kind of out flapping in the wind a little bit, but most of the canopy was wrapped around his body. And this is a 45-degree slope, and he has wedged between this slope and a tree, or some, he was into the edge of he came out of the edge of the trees up at the top, and there was this little outcropping of it wasn't a straight line down the hill, and the trees kind of jutted into the area a little bit, and he rolled into this area and was wedged, wrapped up in all of this equipment, wrapped up and wedged into this tree and the side of the hill, this 45-degree slope hill. And there were brush and other things on the ground there because it was into the tree line a little bit. His head's sticking out towards me, and I could see his, I don't remember which leg it was, but one of his legs had a torn fly suit up on his femur, upper part of his leg, and he had a compound fracture that was not bleeding. So he broke that leg, and that's probably what all the blood that was being flung down the hill that I saw before getting up to there. And as I got closer, those drops of blood became more frequent. But the guy, he is definitely dead. He has no helmet. Helmet probably, I don't know, got torn off when he hit the trees and hit the ground. He had no dog tags around his neck. And I always laugh when I watch a movie and somebody's playing with their dog tags, swinging around their finger or something. We didn't do that with our dog tags. Our dog tags were around our neck, and that's where they stayed every minute of the day. You could go swimming with them, you could shower with them, you get dressed with them. The dog tags didn't come off. But anyway, he had no dog tags, so I'm guessing they got torn off somewhere up in the trees when he fell down and started rolling down this hill. So thinking of Charlie King, I don't know that he ever told anybody that the pilot was dead, 3 months earlier on Christmas Day. But I remember thinking, they're going to know this guy's status, even if they don't know mine. And so I get on the radio and I said, the man is dead. And somebody came over. It wasn't my helicopter pilot. It was probably one of the Sandys or somebody, one of the facts, I don't know, that were in the area. But and I still remember what he said. He said, "Then get him and get the hell out of there." I'm thinking, and I remember thinking this too. I don't know what you're so excited about. I'm the one on the ground. But he was excited, and he said, "Get him and get the hell out of there." Well, I thought about that. This is, I think, like 5 o'clock by now that all of this is happening. He's been on the ground probably 3 hours now. Anybody can travel quite a ways in 3 hours. There could be somebody out there setting up an ambush. But anyway, I look at this situation. I look at how much he's rolled up into this equipment and canopy and parachute lines and seat kit, and he's jammed in there into the brush between this, what little trees there are there and this hillside. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to get this guy out of here in any short time. So I make the decision to leave him, and I go back down the hill, the 100 yards or whatever it is. I get on the hoist. I give the thumbs up to the flight engineer who's looking out the door and running the hoist. He starts raising me up, and there I am. This has been going on for 3 hours now. There I am hanging on this cable below a helicopter. And if there's going to be a trap, this is when it's going to be happening. Fortunately, nothing happened. I got in there. The flight engineer gave me a big grin and stuck his hand out and shook my hand. Welcome back alive aboard. And we took off. It was assumed, I guess, that when the area could be, and I didn't know about this until 2013, 2014. The Air America, which was CIA, Air America pilot said he could hear ground fire when he flew over this village, which was like 1.5 miles away. And he said he could see what looked like about a battalion size of enemy, that were shooting up at him. Now, in 1.5 miles, you can go 1.5 miles in 3 hours, even if you're walking through trees and jungle and dodging aircraft coming in, strafing you and everything else. And I don't know how close the enemy was. I mean, they could have been staying home that 1.5 miles away, but I didn't know about them at the time even. I found that out later when I got copies of the aircraft or the search and rescue logs of the aircraft there. But I decided to leave the guy, and I felt bad. They're always telling you, nobody's left behind, and I talked in 2014, 2013. It was the end of 2013, 2014, and it was March of 2014 that we went back to try to locate this guy. But the brothers, more specifically, one of the brothers did most of the talking to me and calling me and asking questions and such. Anyway, he said, I told him that, I felt bad all these years of leaving him behind. And this brother said, don't feel bad. We would have felt bad if more people had died trying to, get him out. And so, that kind of eased my guilt, I guess, a little bit. But we left him, and we assumed that somebody who had better control of the situation would come in and pick him up and retrieve him. And in 2014, I discovered that they had no idea where he was. They were going off TACAN, which was a radio beacon that was sent out that would indicate to an aircraft the heading from that radio signal, and also the miles, nautical miles, in whole miles and in whole degrees. So they were initially using a TACAN that I think was about 60, 70, 80 miles away. And if you think about that, a 1 degree pie shape 80 miles away is going to be pretty wide. And to the nearest nautical mile, that means it could be plus or minus a nautical mile. And when I actually plotted out where this play field is, It's, it's like a couple of 2.5 miles long and a mile and a half wide. Now, if you're trying to find a hillside 45 years later, they're going to have to put you a little closer than that. And as it turned out, he wasn't even in that playing field, if you will. In fact, as time went on, the location, the scene, I guess, was changed, updated, so to speak, as they started using different TACAN radios. The new location is this, and they updated that about, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times over the 3-hour period there that we were there. And what happened was that scene, quote unquote, drifted, I think it was 13 miles to the northwest. So they really didn't know where this guy was. And that probably explains why nobody went in to recover the body in a timely manner. And it wasn't until 2013 that I realized and was informed that nobody had gone back after this guy. And they were trying to pump me for information. Of course, in the back of a HH-3E, even when you're hanging on the hoist outside of that helicopter, you don't get much of a view of the terrain, especially if you're below a tree line on all 4 sides of you. So I said, well, you put me on the hillside where I was, and I will show you where I found him. They couldn't do that. That was beyond their capability. Nobody was even close to being exact where it was. So anyway, we went out there when I went to Hawaii and joined up with the JPAC team. We then flew to Laos, and I think I was there like about 13 days, 11 days, 13 days.
Now that was in 2014. Went back.
2014.
Okay.
Yes. And the first few days, I might have been where I'm getting the 11 from, but the first 11 days, I'll say, I was not assigned with the recovery or with the investigative team, the IT and the RT. The investigative team went off somewhere, and they were out investigating, interviewing Laotians and former soldiers and everything else, trying to figure out where people were. But anyway, I was with the RT, the recovery team, and we went out and excavated another F-105 crash, James White. If anybody remembers Apollo 1, the fire they had in Apollo 1, that they finally changed some of their protocols using less oxygen and lower pressure. But I think he was a colonel. Colonel White was killed in that Apollo 1 flash fire that they had in the capsule, and none of them got out. It was just a test fire on the pad, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, that White that died in Apollo 1 was the brother to James White, who died in the Vietnam War, well, the Laotian War, when he went in on a strafing run or bombing run. And as he was pulling up, he flew into some clouds and hit the top of a hill. And he was scattered up and down this hillside. They had never found his body either. But anyway, they were excavating this crash site. And the first thing you see when you go to this crash site is there's a bomb sticking out of the dirt on the side of a creek, sort of. It was a dry creek when we were there. But and I was told that since then, they left the bomb, but they did disarm it. They took the end of it off and took out the charge from it. So anyway, but the bomb was still there. And they were excavating up and down this slope, and I helped every day there. They would mark out I don't know, it's about 13 feet by 13 feet. It's probably some metric thing that they used, but uh, they would rope off or twine off, I guess, these places, and then they would go in and take a grid and start digging it out. And uh, they were required to hire a bunch of Laotians, and so you had this chain of Laotians, elbow to elbow, from where we were excavating this little grid over to where they'd set up the screens. And, one Laotian would pass it to the next Laotian, and they would pass it on up to the screens. And then some Americans would screen the flower pot, is about what it amounted to, flower pot of dirt that had been put in there, and look for items, personal items like boot laces or boot eyelets, or G-suit equipment, zippers, things like that. Little pieces of wiring that would have come from the jet. I did find a piece of metal, and as I was excavating down, I came to what appeared to be white soil, more or at least whiter than the rest of the soil. And as I dug down, this white, and I assume it was lead oxide or whatever. But I finally found a piece of metal that was, about, I don't know, a foot by 4 inches. And later I talked to David Dynans. That was the pilot I was there to find, but I talked to his roommate and told him that I'd found that weight. And he said, well, sometimes every now and again they would weigh the F-105. And if it was light on one end, they stuck a weight in there, so that it balanced better. And that's probably what this was, is a lead weight that they'd used in the James White's F-105 to balance it properly. But that was the most significant thing I found. We did find a lot of pieces of wire, some low light gauge wire that would have come from the aircraft. But nothing significant. As it turns out, a few years later, by a few, I mean a couple, they did find some bone material at that crash site, and they did have a funeral even for him. But yeah, he was the brother to the Apollo pilot that died in the flash fire on Apollo 1. Well, my time's running out. I'm doing this recovery every day, not every day, but one day we were out there working, and it sounded like the lightning bolt hit, within 50 yards. Anyway, they shut the operation down, and we all went back to our base camp, they called it, back in this village where we were staying at a guest house type thing, more like kind of like a motel, but not fancy. Anyway, we all went back, and it rained, and by the time I got out of walked from the mess hall over to where I was sleeping in this compound area, I had probably 2 inches of mud stuck to the bottom of my boots. That's how sticky the ground was. And by about 2 hours later, I got my boots finished cleaning up, getting the mud off of them, and eventually they threw some boards out so we could walk over the muddy area to get down to the chow hall thing that they had set up for us there. But anyway, I'm down to the last few days, and this next day the recovery team is coming in, and they will I will then join them. So anyway, they come in, and one of the guys interviews me and tries to get every bit of information I can recall about the incident and where it was and whatnot. And anyway, we go out on the helicopter the next day to search for this crash. And we have,
I'll interrupt for just 1 second. That I'm gonna end up linking the story that you had made. I forgot what the website was, but you have the story there, and in that there's a picture of you, and there's a helicopter. I believe it's red and white in the background. Is that the area that you're talking about now when you flew in?
yeah.
Okay, because what I'm gonna do later when I edit this, I'll put those screenshots up while you're talking.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
The helicopters we were flying on were, well, I think it was Air Lao. Some of them owned by Laos, but some of them I think were owned by New Zealand Air. And it was cute to listen to these guys talk with their Austrian or Australian accents, New Zealand accents. But yeah, they were New Zealand pilots, and I guess Laos government didn't want all of these helicopters belonging to New Zealand Air to be in their country, and so they ended up, I think, purchasing some of them at least. And so, but they still had the New Zealand pilots flying them. But yeah, and so we were out, and there were 4 seats in the back, and a pilot seat, and another seat, which would be like the co-pilot, but there was nothing there to co-pilot the aircraft with. It was just a seat. And every time we left the ground or landed, even, there had to be a Lao official. And so you have 5 non-pilot positions on this helicopter. One of them is going to be a Lao official. The first time out, you have to take a second Lao official to leave him at the dig site or whatever, so that there's always somebody there, a Lao official, which means the first flight out of the day took 3 Americans. And they were, they'd be gone for like 20 minutes before they'd come back. And so it took a little bit of maneuvering to get everybody on the team out to these dig sites and whatnot. But when I finally went with the recovery team, they came in with their 2 helicopters also. We had 2 on the recovery team, and there were 2 with the investigative team. And so they come in, we go out, and we're anytime you did anything in Laos, you had to go get permission. And so they'd land at a village and be gone for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and finally come back and go on to another place and maybe have to go get permission to be there too. But they would talk to these people, and maybe they'd even take along somebody that had some knowledge of what happened back in the late 60s. But anyway, most of us would sit there with the helicopter, and some of the administrators, I guess, of the recovery team, or the investigative team, would go talk to the village chiefs or the district authority or something. The day that we actually found him, I think we probably had about as many Lao officials as we did Americans on that mission. But anyway, this first day, we stop and they go talk, make sure it's okay to be where we're going and get permission. And if we're going into some other area where somebody else is in charge, you have to go visit with them too and get their permission to be in the village chief or the district authority or regional authority or whatever it happened to be. So anyway, we go out, and the New Zealand pilot asked me, "Where do you want to start?" And I said, "Well, I assume that the last updated scene location would be the most accurate. I mean, wouldn't you assume that they've been updating the location of the scene all day long, or the 3 hours long? You would assume the last one, they finally got it right, maybe. So we go out and look. And it was in karst area. Karst is a word that everybody's familiar with in Asia there. You're either on top of the karst or you're on the bottom of the karst. There's very little in between. And sometimes there may be a path up the side of the karst to get to the top, but basically karst, there's either you're on top of it or you're not on it at all.
Those cars that I know, for people that may not understand, if you look at, for example, the Bighorn Mountains, where you have limestone, sometimes granite, it's almost vertical. It's shooting up out of the ground. That's exactly like where Forrest had crashed into a car. So basically, imagine it as the side of a bluff. That some of them could be a few 100 feet tall. Some of them are 1,000 feet tall or more, right? Even in Vietnam or in Laos. I'm sorry, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So that's where you were. You were right up pretty close to a karst when you went back this time.
We were in karst area when we went to look for my site. That first day out, that they were out there flying just for me to look at the area and tell them exactly where we were 45 years earlier. Like, the jungle doesn't grow over 45 years. And, so I'm good. I'm good to find this place.
Yeah, I hear you talking about that, where I was investigating Manging Pass, where all the Frenchmen are buried from the French Indochina War. And when you go back and I mapped out the roads up there, and they must have buried, well, I think close 1,500 men up there. And yeah, I mean, the forest is some of it's not completely covered with trees. I mean, and I mean, that stuff grows really fast, especially in that climate, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're out here and they're showing me this area with karst, and I said, no, that's not the type of terrain I was. What I'm looking for is something with rolling hills, gently rolling hills, no karst, no steep cliffs or anything like that. So anyway, that was the final position that they claimed this guy was located. So we go looked at the next to the last, and that's not it either. Anyway, we work our way up to the first site, or the first location or description, that he was supposedly located. And finally, we're looking at ground like I remember seeing. The hills were gently rolling. There were hills, but nothing you couldn't, walk up and down or whatever. And they were just rolling hills like I remembered. And so now we're in the area of this first description. But again, this first description covers an area like 2.5 miles by 3 miles. And I'm thinking, I told these guys, you put me on the hillside, I'll show you where it is. But they don't know. Anyway, so they start, and I showed the helicopter pilot. I had my little GPS, handheld GPS that I had marked where the center of this playing field that was being described would be. And I held that out for him. I said, okay, here's the center of this grid area that they've indicated. And anyway, so I hold it there, and he's flying. He's looking down at my handheld, as we're flying around. And I said, and also in the combat search and rescue logs, it says it'll be I can't remember now. It's been 10 years, but it'll be at this altitude. I don't know, something like 3,500 feet or 4,500 feet. And so he flies around at about that altitude, flying around, the valleys and everything, trying to be next to the part of the terrain that would be at that altitude. And I say, I look out there and I see fields, little patches of jungle that's smoking, that they're burning. I see little patches of jungle that have been cleared probably a few years earlier. Patches of jungle that's being used to grow rice on the hillside there. And later I was told that the way that works is like about every 15, 20 years, they will go in and clear, I guess they clear lumber at least, but the rest of it they just burn. And they clear that and then use the ashes as fertilizer for 5 years or whatever, until it doesn't produce much anymore. And then they'll go off and clear out another strip of jungle and or patch of jungle and work with it. But I figured, that the protocol for a number of years coming around back to that same spot, they could have been into my area 2 or 3 times in the 45 years. And yet I'm supposed to show them where I was, but this is all going on in the jungle below me as we're flying around, me trying to find on, what looks like just a bunch of jungle with various phases of this farming practice going on, and rolling hills. One rolling hill looked just like the next rolling hill. And, they had no idea where to put me down or show me where to look for it. So at the end of the day, we go back to our base camp, and that's pretty much what they wanted me there for. So I've done what I went there for. The next day, we go out again, and they go off investigating some other rumors, I guess you'd call them. Anyway, they go out, and of course they stop and go off and have Lao beer. Well, I don't know what they do, and they went off to talk to these villagers and the village chiefs and everything. But we're flying around, and we hike up this karst. It was kind of in the same area where we were the previous day, the first time. And we hike up this karst and get up there and get to a point. And they said, okay, they claimed they saw a parachute up here above us, just a little ways here. So we all sit and wait, eat our lunch. And we're on the side of this karst. On the karst side, there's this solid wall. And if you turn around and face away from the karst, you walk out there about 20 feet and you've got a 500-foot drop. So, somehow they managed to get a trail up the side of this karst, but that's about all it was. And anyway, they go up and look around and come back and say, oh, we couldn't find anything. There's no parachute up there at all. So that's pretty much what we did that day, and which was basically nothing. And apparently there was a rumor about somebody had a helmet from somebody during the war. Nobody ever did find anybody with a helmet, so that kind of didn't pan out either. But anyway, the third day, which is my last day with them, full day with them, we go out. They stop at a village again. They're off doing things. I'm there having fun with the kids that are trying to look at this helicopter and everything. And I'm shaking their hands and everything. They're getting a big kick out of that, taking their picture and whatnot. But anyway, they come back and they say, okay, we've got a reported sighting of a parachuting, 2 people parachuted and the year they gave was a year off from when I was there. Anyway, they say, well, we're going to go out and investigate it. Okay. So they start shuffling. And this day we have, like I say, I think almost half the crew was Laotian officials, village chiefs and whatnot. So anyway, they start flying us a few at a time up this valley. And anyway, we finally all get there. And so now we're ready to take this hike. And they said it's about an hour hike up into the jungle there. And so we're on this rolling hill area. I mean, it would be a great place to find the guy I was looking for, but that's not what I figured we were looking for at this point, because it was a double ejection. My guy was a one ejection, and it was the wrong year, off by a year. So we're all hiking up this trail, and it starts to get fairly steeper as we're going up this ridge line. And we come to a creek bed, and they say, okay, we can either keep our feet dry and hike up this ridge line, or we can go up this creek bed. And there's probably 3 or 4 inches of water in the creek, which means, yeah, you're not going to be in it to your kneecaps, but you're going to be muddy, and at least from the knees down, you're going to be muddy and wet by the time we get there. So anyway, they decide to take the ridge line. And so we hike up this ridge line, and it gets to be fairly steep. We finally, and I realized that I should have spent more time on the treadmill, but I was 66 years old at the time. But we get up here to a certain point on this ridge line, and they say, okay, we're going down. And they look off to the right, and we start sliding our way down this fairly steep slope. And we get down to the creek bed there, and the guy that was supposed to be showing us where we were to go points up the creek a little, a few more yards, and he says it's up there. So people go up there with metal detectors, and and they're looking and looking and looking, and they can't find what this guy is promising to show them. So the day is almost over. We had to get back. I think it was like 4 o'clock. We had to have the helicopters back at base camp and shut down by 4 o'clock, which, by the time you wait for the morning dew and clouds to lift so that you can go in their visual flight rules, VFR, and find, the spot you're looking for or you want to be at, that's later in the morning, and then you got to be back by 4. They don't give you much time each day to do much searching, but I'm sure they're making a lot of money off of the government. But anyway, it's time to return if we're going to get back to base camp, because we still have to go drop off all these Laotian officials and everything that we picked up at this last village that wanted to go along with us. So anyway, we're up here. We have not found what they promised us that we would find. So we start going down the creek bed this time, not back up to the ridge line to go down the trail. We're going down the creek bed, and we're crawling under trees, bending over and getting under trees that have fallen across the creek and things like that. And anyway, it starts to spread us out pretty good. And one of the guys in the back says, hollers up to the ones in the front. We can still communicate easy enough, but we can't see each other. And they say, hey, hold up, we're getting behind here a little bit. Let us catch up to you. And anyway, so we all keep working our way down through this creek, squatting down and crawling under things and over things, and finally get there. And I get to the point where everybody's going up the hillside all of a sudden. And so I crawl out of the creek bed up onto this 45-degree slope. And of course, once you're in the creek bed, it's even steeper than that because it's washed out the bottom there. But I get up there and I finally come to an American, and I ask him, so what are we looking for now? And he said, oh, the guy that was showing us where to go. He said, oh, I recognize that tree. There was a big tree, and a lot of the trees have like webbed roots out the bottom. You see them in some movies sometimes, but it isn't just a round tree and then it goes in the ground and the roots grow out. No, the roots kind of come off a little higher, like webs and web feet type thing. But anyway, this is what we're looking for now. Okay, so we get up there and sure enough, there's this pad of nylon with mesh on it, and I assume it's like a back or a seat pad to a parachute. I didn't turn it over to see what was on the other side. It might have been some letdown tape that, to let yourself down out of trees. I don't know. But anyway, there was this piece of obvious man-made canvas or type material, nylon, I'm sure. And then, so I'm standing there just waiting for this to get done. And they go off up to a half right, about 25 feet. I can still hear them talking. I can't see them because the jungle's so thick. And I can hear them talking, that they're finding these things. And finally, one of them, I hear him say, "Is that an ID card?" And they pick it up, and I can hear them trying to read it. And then, is that David T. Dillon, the third? And when I hear the third and all these other words that they've been saying, I said, I talked to them through the trees because I can't see them. I said, well, the guy I'm looking for is David T. Dinan the third. Anyway, so they walk over to me and hand me this card. And it's a military green military ID card. And I look, and sure enough, it's David T. and knowing what I'm reading, Dinan the third. His picture is all faded away. You can see his thumbprint on the ID card or fingerprint. I don't know which print they put on there, but and it was a little tattered around the edge. The plastic was cracked some, weathered, but here's this ID card. And I said, well, this is the guy I'm looking for. And so, they apparently when they're doing this, they are marking and taking a compass heading and measuring how far away from this pad that we had come across. There was a small tree. Well, tree might be a little generous, but it was like a 2-inch diameter start of a tree and they had cut that off and put some red tape on it. And they were using that as zero to measure. And then the guy that was recording all this would take a compass heading and they'd find something. Well, here's this. So they'd have to measure that and record the distance where it was from this little tree branch growing out of the ground. And anyway, we're doing this for, 30 minutes or so. And finally the guy says, every time you find something, I have to record it. And so they decide they need to quit finding things like parachute and cigarette lighters and pen gun flares. And, they found some teeth there, gold tooth.
Now, some of that stuff, I have a picture with a whole bunch of artifacts. I also have a picture of the ID, so I'll get pictures of those if you have them, or did they obtain it?
I didn't take any, and I never saw any pictures. I got the list of things they found, and actually they did go back in. The recovery team went back in a few days later. I don't know, a week maybe. I don't know, or just maybe it was the following week. They went in there and started finding more stuff. And anyway, they came out with a few things more, but yeah. And so they quit digging and finding things, but they did find this ID card, and we all went back down the hill. We did go up the slope back onto the ridge line instead of continuing on down the creek bed. But we did get back, and we got back late. I don't think anybody was too upset because we had so many Lao officials with us that, can vouch for what we were up to. But yeah, we got back there, and I was ahead of the other helicopter had to take more people back to their villages, and so they got back really late. Uh, our helicopter wasn't real late, but the other one was quite a bit late for the rules that they had set down for us. But yeah, so that was the day that we found where David T. Dinan, uh, you know, died, and and anyway, one of the guys kind of chuckled and said, you know, because they asked me if before we found him, have you ever been here before? I said, I've never been here before. When we stood there in the stream bed waiting for them to search up above us for what was supposed to be there. And anyway, when he got back, he commented, it's funny that you said you hadn't been there before. I said, I hadn't been there before. I didn't even know there was a stream. I hiked up the hill to find his parachute, you know, and this was like 60 feet from the stream bed. You know, there would have been no place for the helicopter to drop me 100 feet below him or 200 feet below him on this hillside. And so I told him, I said, when you guys go back looking for this, realize that he is not where I left him. He would have, and I'm only guessing, but I'm guessing the only way it could have happened is somebody went in there, found him, you know, stripped off what they wanted of him. He would have been still probably packing a revolver, and you know, and I don't know what else he would have had in his survival kit and stuff, and seat kit. But somebody probably drug him out of there. You know, took what they wanted of his parachute, or I don't know, took whatever they wanted, and then sent him rolling down the hill the rest of the way into the tree line down at the bottom, which to me just looked like the end of the tree line, or you know, the beginning of the tree line. And I had no idea there was a stream bed, because I could see the trees like it was the edge of the tree line, and the trees went over an edge and over down the hill further. But apparently it was the bottom of the ridge line, and there were some trees down there not far. Probably, well, it was probably the 60 feet above the creek that where he stopped, because everything they found would have had to come with him. It isn't like, okay, over the years this body decomposed and his teeth washed down there and his parachute, you know, pad washed down there with him, and everything washed down within 25 feet of this scene. It had to be sent there when everything was still all attached.
So somebody probably went in there and cut the cords and parachute, dragged them away. I would imagine that. By the way, I have pictures of the picture of the ID card. Still got some dirt on it, and then I have pictures of they're all in little baggies with numbers on them. All the artifacts that they had found around there.
Okay.
One of the questions I have for you that I'm hoping that you can answer too, it baffles me. Now, this is 2014 when you made that discovery, and you went back and you had that stuff, and they found the teeth and a piece of bone, which obviously eventually they did DNA to prove that it was in fact him. My question is, that's 2014. It wasn't until August of 2017 where it looks like his brother, I guess, or whoever, had contacted you and told them they finally proved it. Why did it take them 3 years after they found that in order to set up for the funeral and that? Like, it just seems really odd that it would take that long, you know?
Yeah, and I think TV has ruined people thinking that DNA is something you can do in 45 minutes. And plus I mean, this is only one part of the organization that's, you know, the JPAC that, well, they've changed their name now to DPAA, I think it is. But and then they just changed it from joint task full accounting, JTFA. They had changed it not too long before I got there, and then they've changed it again since I got there. But Department of POWMIA Accounting Agency or something. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, they're doing this all over the world. And, if that was the only thing they were looking for, yeah, they would have evaluated the DNA and discovered that it was actually, David Dinan III. But
that makes sense, I guess. Because I'm looking at it, and it's in your article again. I'm going to link to this. But it says on August 25th, 2017, David Dinan's former roommate called to say that the brothers had decided that the remains, a few bones and teeth, were enough confirmation for them, and the ceremony at the Arlington National Cemetery would likely be conducted on April 2018. So wasn't it? It was a year. Well, what is that? 6 months or whatever after they confirmed it that they had the funeral at the Arlington Cemetery.
Yeah, and there's a wait. As I recall, the anticipated waiting time to get into Arlington was actually beyond where we actually did it. In other words, they got him in there a little faster than they anticipated. I guess there's a several month waiting list. If you want to be buried at Arlington, you stand in line.
So do they have? I mean, is there like a whole list of people that they still have yet to go back that they have a possible location? Is there still people out there, others that's quite a few years, I mean, I'm not surprised that when you realize it's 2013, wow, my God, I thought somebody would have retrieved them by now. So I would imagine I know there's some that are just lost. They have no idea where they are.
Right.
So,
yeah, I think the roommate, Ed Sykes, was pushing to get a JPAC team in to find David Dinan. And apparently when they found me, and I guess they'd pretty much expanded their options, expired every list they'd ever used to find people who had any knowledge. The way I got notified was, we're looking for the crew members of Jolly Green 16, and gave the date, looking for David Dinan. And somebody suggested that you were in Nakhon Phanom at that time. Would you have any suggestions or hints as to who we would be able to contact? And I got basically that message from two different sources. And I wrote back to both of them, starting with, I was the guy that went to the ground that day. What can I do for you? And so then, and I guess it took a little bit of finagling, because they'd already set the budget for that year's search in Laos, and I was not on the budget.
I just know something while you were talking. I'm sorry to interrupt again. When you said Jolly Green 16, so that was the Jolly Green that you were on that day. The call sign was Jolly Green 16,
right? As I recall, yes.
All right. Well, the picture with Forrest Fenn with all the men standing there. That's that Jolly Green 16 is also the same one that rescued him. So the only reason why I mentioned it's interesting about the Candy Ant thing, because you were on, then you may have been on that same helicopter, if that is in fact Jolly Green 16, that they're standing there in front of the picture. We don't really know that.
Right.
But that's it. That's interesting, because they're 3 months after the same call sign, Jolly. Because do they change call sign, or they the same? Does the same helicopter keep the same call sign?
The helicopter kept its call sign.
All right. So this whole event that you're talking about was Jolly Green 16. So Forrest Fenn saying that Jolly Green 16, at least we know it was the same helicopter. I have no idea whether that's the same one in the picture or not, but yeah. Right. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to get that before I forget it.
that is a curious situation.
It is now. And the other interesting thing now, the one where you were talking about the different incident that you weren't there with the PJ that was killed when he was on the bottom of the line. Um, that happened. Obviously, I would imagine that was probably. It seems to me that if the pilot went down and the plane was anywhere near him where he went down, it would make locating the pilot a lot easier. Right? I mean, how long do the homing devices? I believe it's attached to the parachute that goes off and sends out a beep, or is that their radio that beeps to indicate where they are? Do you know if it's their radio or is it the parachute itself have something in it?
Well, each of us packed an emergency radio, and sometimes we would like to know that it's actually going to work. And so when we assumed alert status for the day, we would take that radio and sometimes contact control tower at NKP and say, radio check, how do you copy? It was not unusual to have that control tower come back and say, please keep this frequency clear, which I don't know if that meant that they were getting some emergency communications going on, something that we couldn't pick up on our handheld, down on the flight line, whereas the radio tower, control tower, was involved with another rescue. So I don't know. But sometimes they would say they read us just fine. But I mean, obviously, if they tell us to keep this channel clear, they're reading us, or at least we're doing something to annoy them. But yeah, and I think there was a button that we activated, the beeper, and then that's when they would come, and it made communicating over that radio very difficult, because you got this beeper going off and you're trying to talk over it because it's on the same channel, same frequency. And so the first thing they would do when they fly over an area that they've radio triangulated to be the beeper's location, they would come over and say, beeper, beeper, come up, voice. And at that point, you would then turn off the beeper and come up with, talking over the frequency instead of beeping over the frequency. But
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, that story just amazes me that, with to go back after all that time. I can't imagine what that must have played on your mind over the decades as they passed. It's just an amazing thing that you actually went back and found him, and the family got some kind of a closure. I mean, they knew he was deceased, but you really don't get the closure. So I mean, it's just an amazing story. It's an amazing story, and it is my opinion. I think that you guys, by you guys, I mean the pararescue teams. Those were kind of the unsung heroes. I mean, I know you're not going to say it, you're humble, but I mean, to come down, going down on a table from a helicopter in the middle of what could be fire at any second, you're completely undefended, and going out to rescue somebody. And, and I see you continued that out throughout your life, that kind of same behavior on the volunteer fire department and so on and so forth. So I really, I mean, I want to thank you for your service, and I really, appreciate what you're doing. And I just think that's an amazing story. And it's just, I don't know if fate is involved. It's just really odd, because I met you through Forrest Fenn, right? And people listening they don't know this yet, but Sully, the guy who pulled Forrest into the helicopter, is alive. And it turns out that he lives roughly 4 or 5 miles away from Leland's daughters. So these guys have not seen each other in 53 years, right? 1971.
I'm not sure where he went. In November '71, I was stationed in the Philippines, and I had been there for 15 months. And I don't recall if Sully was. I don't think Sully was there. I don't know where Sully got sent after being in Thailand. Maybe he extended another year. I don't know. So he put in 2 years there. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just really odd that they end up being. Well, I mean, you're not neighbors with him, but I mean, that's just it's just really weird. And like I said, when you talk about when you do my war for me thing, and I don't know if you read that or not because you weren't really into Forrest Fenn, and this story right here is about you today. But but if you look at it, the way he describes, just at the end of my war, last part, where he's talking about the Frenchman and the buried in the knee high grass, and what does his family know in France, and what was he doing, and all of these million or thousands of soldiers. What was it, like 56, 57,000 men died, I think, in that war. And then you got past wars, and these guys, you know, they're forgotten, and it's really a shame, and that's one of the reasons why I really appreciate you giving your story, because again, usually when people tell these kind of stories, they're from an officer's perspective, such as a pilot and so on and so forth. It's very rare that you would have an enlisted man that would even want to do this. And I commend you for all you've done, because I've seen it, just a little bit of research, how much that you seem to be putting into this to help track down other people that were lost like that. And it's just really commendable. It's just amazing what you do. And I don't know. Steve Klein is here, and I got James Millett here. Now, Steve's daughter, you can see a picture over there. She's in the Army. She just enlisted. So Steve's worried about her. Steve's brother, I believe, was fought in Afghanistan. And then James Millett was I think he was in the Army. So anyway, if you guys want to come up and unmute, and if you have any questions for Leland, go ahead. I'm gonna go outside for a couple minutes to have a cigarette. I'll be right back.
I really don't have any questions, but I appreciate you telling your story. You're a real hero, and I thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Steve, your daughter is what is she going to be? What is she training for?
She graduates in March for MP, military police, and then she's going to airborne.
So, Steve, how many planes have you ever jumped out
of? None. Zero.
His daughter's afraid.
I'm scared of heights.
That's interesting. I mean, I spoke with Leland. The first day, he gave me a call, probably about 2 hours, and then he emailed me some pictures, and then called me back another half hour ago. And yeah, it was interesting. And I mean, the stories that he has to tell. There's the one, and I don't want to tell all your story. The other one where you were on a mission where the helicopter was getting shot at, right? And you were talking about manning the gun, and the hydraulic fluid was all over the back door, and the tube. Are your gun jammed? I was that one of the rescues that you just described, or was that a different?
No, it was I was TDY again to UDORM, and so I was on the H-53 with the 3 miniguns, and I was on the ramp. I was the PJ on the ramp in the back, manning that minigun, and as we would go in to locate the pilot, well, it's hard to describe. It's almost like you were feeling ground fire. In fact, the flight engineer got kind of excited and said, "We're taking hits, we're taking hits." And the pilot said, "Where are we hit?" And so, I start looking around. I don't see any holes anywhere. It was a difficult thing to describe unless you were actually sensing it. But yeah, so we went in And each time we'd go in, we'd take more hits, and finally when my minigun jammed and the window minigun was out of ammo, we pulled out and let Hybrid go in and make the pickup, and they did. And as a result, when we landed, we went back to Lima Site 98 to regroup there in Laos and to refuel, I think probably too, because each helicopter dropped their tip tanks. So we were limited amount of fuel. We still had to fly back into Thailand, but yeah, I would as we come over and take rounds through the floor, they'd shoot out the hydraulic cylinders on the ramp that I was standing on, and squirt out hydraulic fluid for a while. I actually have the round that had lodged into one of the parachutes hanging on the side of the helicopter. We noticed the bullet hole into the parachute, and we opened the parachute. And I don't know that I'm glad I didn't have to use the parachute, because before it stopped the round, all the nylon had melted together. So I don't know if it would have opened up, been able to pop all those melted fusions of nylon into an actual parachute again. But yeah, that was the day that, and I remember standing there on flak vests again, standing on flak vests on the ramp, and watching a round come up through the floor and go through the flexible metal tubing. There were one on each side of the minigun that kind of like a funnel that would funnel the spent brass out the back of the helicopter, so you weren't having to stand on spent brass on the ramp. And I watched that round go up through, about 1.5 feet in front of my left foot, and go out through the gun that I was holding, onto, and then up through what was left of the ceiling of the tail there of the helicopter. But yeah, and like I said, I got a round out of the parachute that day that I dug out of the parachute. And Hybrid finally went in and made we went off, flew off, and unjammed my gun. To do that, it was a big screwdriver, actually, and you stuck it in to the 6 barrels and kind of forced them around. And
high tech.
Oh yeah.
So that picture that I have with you standing next to the pilot Egan, that's the actual helicopter that you're talking about that was shot, right? Or no?
Yes. The big.
So what was that? Was Egan the pilot on that?
I think we're talking about the same thing.
Well, let me show you the picture. If I have it handy, let me pull it up. I'll share it in the Zoom here so that you can see it. This picture.
Yeah, that was that was Lowbird, supposed to be Lowbird that day, and that's the crew, the 2 pararescuemen, the flight engineer, the photographer, and the 2 pilots.
So yeah, this is so people watching. This is Egan. He's the same pilot. He's wearing that same funny looking hat that he had in Forrest Fenn's picture.
Zoom in a little bit more.
And this is Lauren. I can't. I mean, it's a small picture. I don't want to, because I'm recording the Zoom right now. So this is Mr. Sorensen here now. You retrieved, what was the rank when you had retired? I think my note here says actually I don't have that note. But When you left the Air Force, what rank were you?
I was a staff sergeant, E5.
Okay, that's it. I'm sorry. So yeah, and I don't know. You were saying do you know each one of these people by name, or would you rather just not say it? Or?
I have I have that recorded in pictures somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, what I got to do is I'm gonna replace this screen with a better. If you have any of these pictures or anything, you can email me and then I'll do it. Just just for posterity to know who's who. I'll put it, and then what I'll do is when you were talking before, when you were talking about the ID and the items that they found, I'll show those pictures during that time and so on and so forth. So I just want to, I'll wait until I get better pictures. This one is kind of small that I have, so I can't really zoom in and see the details. But so that is the helicopter that was shot up in the story that you just told right now.
Yeah, we had 20 holes in that helicopter, even after dropping the tip tanks. And I know both tip tanks were shot also because we were streaming fuel as we would go in and take ground fire. We dropped the tip tanks to go in for the pickup. But
so that was one other thing you told me about that I wanted to just repeat here. Well, the tip tanks you're talking about are just these little things. They look like winglets that come out of the back of the helicopter. And those are like extra fuel tanks. And a lot of times you said that they would just dump them or drop them off if they needed to recover some weight based on what they were going to be lifting out. So that was common. But this time they expelled them because they had holes in them and they were leaking fuel.
Well, we dropped them because we were anticipating going in to make the pickup. In fact, it's kind of almost comical. Being on the tail, on the ramp, you don't see things until they go behind you. And anyway, they were going to drop the tip tanks on this pass, and so they dropped them. And the last thing I saw of those tip tanks, they were both stuck in the ground, side by side, sort of, not real close, but stuck in the ground there in the woods in the forest. And, they dropped them in a clear area so I could see them, but yeah, they were just nose in. I don't know, they were probably buried 3 or 4 feet in the ground, but yeah, we got rid of them. Well, if only the shooting them up was the problem, we would still be able to hold on to them because I guess they were self-sealing. And so, when they're initially shot, I could see fuel streaming pretty good out behind us. And, but as time went on, not very much time even, just a few seconds even, that stream, got less and less until finally it sealed itself off. And then the next time we go over, they shoot out the other side and, that's streaming pretty good. And then it trickles back to nothingness. And so they would have been useful as tip tanks still, but if you're going in to make the pickup, they needed to drop those so that the weight, you had more power to lift rather than packing fuel tanks around that you didn't need. And I mean, they were big fuel tanks. It's kind of like you see on jets hanging below the wing. There was a lot of fuel. I don't remember how much, 1,000 pounds of fuel maybe in each one. I don't know. Can't remember.
So is there anything that you want to say that I'll stop the recording after that, but I want to give you a chance in case there's anything else you want to say.
The call signs on David Dinan, they were looking for the crew of Jolly Green 16 and Jolly Green 09. And apparently I was on Jolly Green 16.
Do you know what the pilot's call sign was? I know like Forrest Fenn, I believe it was no, I can't remember now. I remember the number was 81, but
was it Sandy?
No, the pilot's identifier when you went in on the rescue.
Well, the one I went down and actually picked him up and brought him back in, and he's still alive today. At least last I heard. He writes me every January 18th when was the day I picked him up, but and thanks me for 53 years ago or whatever.
Oh,
But
you may not know. Yeah, I'm looking now. At Forrest Fenn's call sign was Litter 81, Litter 81. I mean, I guess the pilot,
okay.
that's what Richard Hall, one of the pilots of Sandy, was referring to as they're going in to rescue Litter 81. So I was just wondering if you had this man's, whatever his call sign was.
I don't, and it could have been they weren't all American pilots that we picked up either. Some of them were Thai pilots that even into Laos. Uh, they were supporting, they were supporting Laos as well. It could have been an indigenous pilot, I guess.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the call signs, like the guy I picked up, Stormy 02, because he was the backseater of an F4. He was Stormy 02 Bravo. If we had been shot down that day, I would have been Jolly Green 16. Well, no, I wouldn't. Well, yeah, on the day of the one that I went back in on 2014. On that day, I would have been on Jolly Green 16, and because I was the PJ, the pilot would have been Jolly Green 16 Alpha, the co-pilot Jolly Green 16 Bravo, the flight engineer would have been Jolly Green 16 Charlie, and I would have been Jolly Green 16 Delta. That's how they did the call sign. So whatever the call sign of the aircraft was that day, they were either Alpha Bravo or whichever position they were on the crew. But
I've got just
I don't know what the call sign was on the day that we got shot up there at the PDJ.
all right. So anything else that you want to say?
Well, I was curious. Well, I was curious to see what PJs do today. What their mission is, because they're not picking up down pilots anymore. And as I studied into that, I discovered that job went out with Vietnam War. Once they left Vietnam, that was not their job anymore. And so I'm not really sure today, I guess, what PJs do.
Oh, I can give you a little bit of a little bit of information. There's if you look in the comments on, I think he might have deleted the comment. He made a comment that he was actually um, on the last video that I put up there, where I didn't mention her name, but I was showing the class pictures. Somebody contacted me that was a PJ in the comments there, and what they did after they got out was, I believe they said they went into the. Now I can't. Now I can't
They
think.
do smoke jumping?
No, the Coast Guard, and they're doing sea rescues coming down, like to do sea rescue. That's what they do. So I would imagine that maybe they would do that, or maybe I don't know what else. But that was just one example. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but he deleted this comment. But he left a comment there. There was a couple of people that left comments in there. I think even on Richard Hall's video, he didn't know what the name of the pilot was that was in Sandy 4. He couldn't recall the name, and somebody went up there, put the name. I think his last name was Clymer or something like that, Clymer. So people are amazing when they see these videos. So maybe, when I put it out there, you'll get some comments, and I don't know. I'm going to leave links to your article out there. So I don't know, if anybody if you're open to having people contact you. I'm obviously not going to give out any of your contact information, but I'll leave the articles, and you can leave a link. I mean, leave a comment down below, and if you want to reach out to Leland, and I'm sure he'll see the comments, and then he can get a hold of you if anybody wants to discuss anything with him, or any of his old buddies, or anybody else that has any questions. I know he agreed that I can do this live, but what happened, I called him on the phone today, and we were, like I anticipated, we would have some issues trying to get Zoom working, and I just figured a live was not the way to do it, you know. So, but I did get some questions, and hopefully, you know, like I said, we pretty much answered everything that anybody would have, and again, I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this out of your schedule.
Yeah, let me say something else. If you come across call signs with Jolly Green, like I say, the H3s, the two on into March, and that March mission were Jolly Green 09 and Jolly Green 16. And I think there were some 20 numbers also, but they were H3s. The H53s had higher numbers, like Jolly Green 69 and Jolly Green 72. So that'll give you an indication if you're available, you know, if you're privileged to the call sign that they were using, if they're in the teens and the lower 20s, and maybe even into the 30s. I don't know. Depends how many Jolly Greens there were, H3s, but the HH3E would have been the lower numbers, and the up in the upper 60s and 70s, maybe even into the 80s, I don't know, would have been the HH53s. So that's just a little indication of what type of aircraft it was.
Okay. Again, thanks a lot for your for taking the time out to do this. And anybody that's watching, if you see any comments, I'm gonna go back and, you know, when I post this, I'm gonna edit it to make it look a bit nicer, and I'm gonna put some screenshots in there that I'd like to. I know Leland sent me two or three pictures. If he has any higher resolution, like the one with Egan and you standing next to that helicopter, if you have any other pictures like that, I'll include them in this when I edit it and upload it. So thanks again. I'm going to stop the recording now.